The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zig Zag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, across the moat from Oakland, and in the great state of California. Now, there are a bunch of great states. I grew up in New York, great state. I can confirm that with you, with my guest, just how great it was to grow up in New York. And he's not a California expert, but he's a New York expert. And my old buddy from summer camp, who I'm catching up with after 58 years. Robert, don't call me Robert, it's Bob D'Angelo.
Good afternoon.
How are you, man?
It's good to talk to you. It's been a long time.
Yeah, we talked off the air a little bit, and so many memories came up just from talking to you from 2 minutes off the air. I had to put us on to keep it spontaneous, and I'm going to talk, first of all, we'll talk about our relationship and summer camps and what have you, but let's start it off with a bang. Hershey, Pennsylvania, what was it, 1962? Am I correct?
Sounds about right.
All right. Wilt Chamberlain scores 100 points. Now,
I was working the bench that night.
You were working the bench. Our mutual friend, Larry Jacobs, from way back then, was the manager, the equipment manager of the Warriors. Another friend of ours from camp was a fellow by the name of Jeff Millman. He was the official, what they call him, he worked the bench.
He was the assistant equipment manager and the water boy.
And the water boy.
He was in high school. He was about 15 at the time.
Right. You're a couple of years, he's my age, and you're a couple of years older than me. You were privileged to see Wilt score against my New York Knickerbockers in those days. 100 points. Darrell Imhoff, Cleveland Buckner. No one could stop Wilt that night. It was unbelievable. Tell me about your impression of the game.
Well, before the game, Wilt said in the locker room that he was going for the record. He had set the record at 79 a few weeks earlier. And he went out there, and they kept feeding him the ball, and they kept letting the Knicks score because they wanted the ball back so Wilt could get the record. And it was either the end of the third quarter, the beginning of the fourth quarter, Wilt had 81 points. And then the last 19 points were easy because the Knicks just virtually scored every time, and the Warriors took the ball down, and Wilt stood in the key and just slammed the ball in or shot the ball in. He was a heck of an athlete. And it was all planned. He wanted to score 80 that night, but it got away from them, and he scored 100. And that's never been equaled. It never will be equaled. I don't think anybody ever got to his 79 points since then, which was the second best. It was the highest score ever.
Elgin Baylor scored a bunch, but not that many.
It was the highest score ever for the Knicks for a losing team. I believe they scored 175 points, 159 or 160 points, and Warriors scored, I think, 175. And so the Knicks would have won any other game in history with that score, but they lost that one badly. It was an unbelievable day. He was an unbelievable athlete. And they took him out with about 40 seconds left to go, and the way that game was going, he could have scored two more times.
And there's a very famous picture of Wilt after the game with a sign that says 100 on it.
Yes.
And it's on Google. And Jeff Millman, the late Jeff Millman, I recently read, said by that, a gentle soul, a good guy. I don't say that about many people. He was one of those. So rest in peace, Jeff. He wrote that sign out. So, and now I realize you sat on the bench. This has been a terrific memory that evokes. Tell me, when we went to camp, Paul Arison of the Warriors would come up, and a couple of times a season, a camp season, and it was 8 weeks. It was sleepaway, and it was just a terrific camp in the Poconos. It's called Kittatinny Camp, and I pay homage to that camp for forming me, both good, bad, and indifferent, helping to form me, because I went there like a bunch of years, 7, 8.
I think I was there for about 8. Yeah, Arison came up a couple of times this summer, and one of the times I was traveling with the Warriors, I'd only do it on school breaks. Larry gave me some stuff something to carry my stuff in, and it was Paul Arison's old traveling bag. Well worn, number 11 on it. Not his name, but the Warriors emblem and number 11. And I still had it until about 20 years ago when it dry rotted to nothing, and I couldn't carry it around to use it anymore. And he was probably the next best player on the team, but there were other great players.
Alvin Addles was on that team. Alvin Addles scored 17 points. Alvin Addles later in his life was on the board of directors of a nonprofit that I ran out here in California. Another gentleman, a terrific guy. But
another name comes to mind, and I can't remember what his real first name was somebody they called Pickles Kennedy.
Pickles Kennedy, very few people in this world would bring up Pickles Kennedy. Pickles Kennedy was a minor league baseball player as well. And he was made the Warriors. He was like the 12th guy, probably the 10th guy in those days. They'd only carry 10 guys on the roster. And he made the team 1 or 2 years. I think he was at a Temple, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I got to know him because he sat on the bench a lot, and that was where I sat during the games, on the end of the bench.
And there was another guy I'll bet you got to know sat on the bench an awful lot, a guy named Ludwig.
Yeah.
He was reserve center, played behind Wilt, got into like 14 minutes of the year. This guy sat
and his job was to play. I think his job was to play dirty when he got in. But I'm not sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Also had Joe Grabowski from those days that I remember. Wilt replaced Neil Johnson, who up until Wilt came along, and his Wilt's era, was a pretty good center in his day. Big old rebounder, and he was on a championship team with the Warriors before Wilt came along. And Wilt
was a perfect
the dynamic
fit for that team. He was a perfect fit for that team because he grew up in Philadelphia and played for Overbrook High School.
Yes, went to the same high school as another one of our camp buddies, the Pearsons. Craig Pearson was my buddy. Billy Pearson and Stanley ran a sporting goods store, Pearsons. Their dad and uncle did, and they inherited it down the line. Craig became team doctor in spring training of the Cubs and the A's. Years later, I got to reacquaint with him in Mesa, Arizona, and I got to visit him a number of times in his adult years, and he remained, till his passing, another great guy, remained a big sports fan, and always reminded me that he went to the same high school as Overbrook High, as Wilt, as Wayne Hightower, as Wally Jones, and Craig played a little bit on that Overbrook High School team.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, you taught me something. I didn't know that Larry's dad, Larry Jacobs' dad, had a piece of the Warriors with Eddie Gottlieb.
Yeah. Larry's dad's name was Sidney, and he had a piece of the Warriors. Eddie Gottlieb had some investors, but I don't know if he continued to have his piece when the team moved to San Francisco. I lost touch with Larry around that time, and probably hadn't seen him. I've tried to track him down, and I can't find hide nor hair of him. And I probably haven't seen him since I was 20 years old, and that was 55 years ago.
Does it? We're talking a little off the air. Does it not go faster than I don't know to equate it with, because time goes fast the older you get, and it's scary. It's scary.
I got the rude awakening 6 months ago when my son told me he's retiring in 8 years. That's the rude awakening of how fast time goes.
Yes, indeed.
He's 8 years from retirement, and I retired 14 years ago.
Well, my
been doing
son
volunteer work ever since.
My son is about to turn 30, and that means he can't be trusted. So,
that was the old saying when we were kids: we can't trust anybody over 30. And my brother said to me, who was 6 years younger and went to the same camp, he said, a week before my birthday, he said, another week I won't be able to trust you anymore. And I said, 6 years from now, you won't trust yourself.
Right.
And he turned out to be really trustworthy, though.
It's always good to be cautious, though.
Mm-hmm. I hard to believe we're talking about things that happened in the early 60s.
All right. Now, where did you settle in life? Are you still in Brooklyn?
No. I live in Sarasota, Florida. I haven't lived in Brooklyn since I was 18. I've lived in 8 states. I was in the entertainment industry. I produced road shows. I, at one point, managed 3 Broadway theaters. I produced, as a name producer, a show on Broadway, and then I was also one of the unnamed 20 producers on about a half dozen others. And I ran performing arts centers around the country and designed and supervised the construction of a few. So I moved every place I had a job, because these things were about 7 to 10 year projects. And I would buy a house and put my kids in school and stay there for 7 to 10 years. And I finished my last project 14 years ago and said, these take 7 to 10 years, and I don't want to work that much longer. So I retired, became a consultant for a while.
I have a show on this network called Bronx Roots with a fellow by the name of David Hubler and Michael Preminger. My point is, we just kibitz. My roots are in the Bronx. My grandparents, before we moved to Queens, raised me the first 5 years in the Bronx. And we get to find out and communicate to my audience what the traits are of a Bronxite that they take with them in life. Now, we don't do a Brooklyn show, but I want to ask you, as a Brooklynite, what were the traits of growing up in Brooklyn, being raised, having your friends all there? What are the traits that made you successful, that contributed to your success, that you picked up, that you could think of it's because of your Brooklyn roots?
Well, in the early days, it was my friends. It wasn't traits so much as friends. And the show I produced on Broadway was Mum and Shunts, and I did that with Arthur Schaffman, who went to the same high school I did. We had lost touch with each other for a number of years, and then we got back together again, and we actually went into business together. We also managed some talent. We were agents for some comedians, specifically Red Skelton. And
oh, wow.
Arthur had made an arrangement with Red Skelton, and I was involved in that also. But I guess the biggest trait that I learned out of Brooklyn was never believe somebody when they tell you can't do it. I mean, I was told all along the way I can't do it. I was interviewed once years ago by my alumni magazine shortly after I got out of college. And they said, what is at Syracuse University? And they said, what do you want to do? And I said, eventually I want to have a company that supervises the design, the construction, and the opening of performing arts centers. And everybody said, you can't do that. You're not an architect. You're not an engineer. You're not a financier. And I said, all of those people can be hired. Well, not financiers, but architects and engineers are hired. And within 10 years after that, I built what was then a very expensive performing arts center. It was $20 million. The last one I did was $278 million. And I'm not an architect. I'm still not an architect. I'm still not an engineer, and I'm still not a financier. So when somebody says you can't do it, I think Brooklyn comes into play and says, yes, I can do it. It's perseverance. Don't give up. I wasn't a great athlete, but I worked very hard at it.
Don't be modest. Don't be modest, Bob. I remember you. If you weren't a great athlete, you were fast.
I was a fast runner, and I turned that into a football scholarship. I didn't play a lot, but I had 4 years of free education.
That's a great athlete as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
You're a modest great athlete. How about that?
Yeah. I don't know if you remember New York sports, high school sports, but there was something called the Game of the Week for football, and it was broadcast by Marty Glickman.
Marty Glickman, yeah.
Marty recruited me for Syracuse, and I married his niece, Susan Glickman.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Marty became family. Yeah, she's long deceased.
I've done shows on this network on Marty Glickman. He was obviously every Jewish kid in the world's hero growing up in New York, and from the standpoint of a broadcaster, he was a hero, an Olympic star, a crusader, a man who took a misfortune and made it positive.
Yeah. He never actually ran in the Olympics.
Right.
Hold on, let me turn off this phone. People keep calling me. Maybe they're hearing this on the air.
I understand why. All right.
Yeah, Marty actually didn't run in the Olympics, although he was the reigning 100-yard dash runner in North America.
Tell the story about why he couldn't run.
Sure.
And what if you were.
There were two Jewish boys on the Olympic teams supposed to be running, and Marty was going to run in two races, including being the anchor in the 100-yard dash. The Olympics were in 1936 in Berlin. Adolf Hitler was going to be there, and Avery Brundage, or Mick Avery Brundage, I can't remember, who was the head of the U.S. Olympic Committee, insisted, and a suspected Nazi, insisted that Marty and the other Jewish boy, whose name escapes me, be taken out of the
Stoller.
I
think his name was Stoller.
That's correct. That's it.
Okay.
And insisted that they be taken out, and Jesse Owens, who was not a record holder, was put in, and he won 4 medals. He had a spectacular Olympics, and he won 4 medals. And I don't think he ever made any money as an athlete afterwards because he didn't have a sport. And track, he didn't make any money running track. Marty went on to play professional football and then became the voice of the New York Giants and Yonkers or Roosevelt Raceway. And he broadcast the Olympics several times. And he was credited as the first person to ever do what we call today the play-by-play of professional basketball. He invented the patter for the play-by-play of basketball and was quite a celebrity in New York.
He was indeed. And the idea that he was not permitted to run in the Olympics affected his partner or his fellow Jew in a very negative way. So he was always the two people could get the same hand dealt to them in life, and it's how they react to that hand that's important. And
well, Marty was from Brooklyn. And
right.
he was a never say never guy. And he turned that into an All-American prize in football. And then he went on to become a sportscaster. And he actually played for the Giants for a while. And he had a major life, and not just a career, but a major life, important charitable person in the New York Jewish scene. And he trained athletes. He trained Marv Alpert. He trained Bob Costas. They used to go and spend time on his boat, and he would teach them how to sportscast. They also both
I
went
was
to
going to say
university.
NBC would bring in announcers from their affiliates all over the country to spend time with him and
Yep.
Be mentored by him. He was an iconic man. Call it what call him an athlete, call him a broadcaster, call him a human being.
He was one smart son of a gun.
Yeah.
He made something.
Was he as likable off the air as he was on the air?
Yes. But he had more interest than just sports. He was interested in politics. He was interested in what was going on around him. He did sports all day long, but he didn't really want to talk about sports off the air. But I'll tell you, he knew everybody, and whenever his niece and I were any place and we wanted to go to a game, it was arranged. It was arranged, and usually we sat in the press box.
Very nice.
He was a nice man. He was very nice to me, and obviously very nice to his niece. His brother, Sid Glickman, was my wife's father, and Sid was scheduled to swim in the Olympics 4 years later, but there was a war going on, and we didn't participate. And by the time the war was over, Sid was too old to compete. Swimmers have a very narrow competing period, and if you don't do it by the time you're 22 or 23, you're not going to do it. And so he was an Olympic class swimmer. And neither one of these guys looked like athletes, but they had determination.
That's what's important.
Yeah.
Hey,
Marty was like a fire plug. He was short, he was wide, but he was fast, and he turned the fastness into sports other than running. He was a good football. He was a great football player. He was an All-American.
And he would announce locally. He, like you said, he did the high school game of the week. He also announced other sports from high school. My high school, Newtown High School in Queens, New York, Elmhurst, New York, they were in the soccer, city championship in soccer one year, and we all went out to see them, play for the city championship. That was a big deal, believe me. Marty Glickman announced that game, and I don't remember watching the soccer game. I just watched him announce the game. I couldn't take my eyes off. This is Marty Glickman.
I'll tell you something you may or may not know. He never got paid for those high school games. He volunteered.
Really?
He liked kids.
Wow.
He volunteered to do those games. I mean, how much could they have paid him if they paid him? $50? This was a man who was already making probably $100,000 a year, which was a lot of money back then. I mean, he had a home in New Rochelle. He had a place in Manhattan, and he had a boat big enough to live on 3 or 4 months a year.
Not bad. Not bad.
So,
and
a little known story, his son Todd died in he was a newsman in New York, and he died in a helicopter crash.
Oh.
He was a radio weatherman, and he died in a helicopter crash.
I hope it was after Marty passed.
It was, yeah.
It
was.
Good. I mean.
So we just stumbled upon this. I mean, Marty was my uncle-in-law, and I met him because he interviewed me before a football game.
Wow. And then Syracuse. Tell me about
Yeah.
that experience in your life.
Well, I sat on the bench. I played 22 minutes. Back then, you had 3 years of eligibility, and I played 22 minutes. I did quarterback the scout team.
And
for
did
those
you
who
ever
don't know
have a
football,
famous coach? Schwarzenegger was
Ben Schwartzwalder. Yeah,
Schwartzwalder
from West Virginia. Ben Schwartzwalder, and he was a tough SOB. Today he did something to me that today he gets sued for, because freshman year all the freshmen had to introduce themselves, talk about their honors, and announce what their major was. And most of them were phys ed, physical education or recreation majors. And I mentioned that I was a drama major. And he blew his whistle and he said, "We're going to have 2 locker rooms around here, one for the men and one for the drama major."
Oh.
Today you get sued for that.
You could have owned Syracuse.
Yes, today, yeah. One for the men and one for the drama major. But that was better than having to go through the gauntlet and get paddled.
Yes, indeed. Hey, Robert, what a terrific podcast. Thank you, my friend.
You're welcome.
We'll do this again, I hope.
Okay, we're done?
We are, unless you have anything else to close it out with.
We shared some years together. We were a couple of years apart, and I don't believe we were friends, but we certainly spoke on some occasions. Did you had a brother named Bruce?
I still do, Bruce Tycho.
You still do. I was going to ask. Yeah, and he was younger.
He was younger than me, and he just became a grandfather. So I'll throw out a peaceful dove to Brother Bruce.
Okay. I have grandchildren ranging from 8 to 22. One of them just started a job, finished his business degree at the Stern School of Business at NYU, and started a job as a financial analyst. And then I have an 8-year-old. So it's all over the map.
Nice.
And,
you've lived a good life.
I remember your brother also. He was, a couple of years younger than you?
He was 4 years younger than me, and he was, speaking of drama, he was involved in a lot of the productions that Kittatinny did in terms of, we put on shows. I remember Guys and Dolls. We put on The Music Man and what have you, and he was big into that.
I got into the theater business largely because of that camp. I think I was probably about 12, and somebody asked if they could fix a PA system. The PA system in the rec hall was broken. And I volunteered because I was a ham radio operator. And I volunteered and I fixed the PA system, and then I started building lights. And by the time I left there, I was the dramatics counselor. And I went to drama school. I got my bachelor's degrees in theater. But it was because of that camp that I wound up with my profession. It's real weird. So I probably worked with your brother on some of those shows. I would be the one working lights and setting up the sets and moving things. And then when they needed a crowd scene, I was in the crowd singing along with the rest of them. So I was in that. I remember that Music Man production, and Bells Are Ringing, and West Side Story. And,
absolutely. Jerry Blatt was.
He became very successful in New York. He was Bette Midler's music director for many years.
Yes, he was. And tragedy brings me back. This poor man contracted AIDS and died in the very early state. We didn't even know what AIDS was about. And it turns out that that then President Reagan was holding back research for AIDS. But that's another story.
What's odd about that is that I know Ron Reagan, his son, and Ron Reagan was living next door before Ronald Reagan became president, next door with the woman that's now his wife. And Ron Reagan at the time and his wife at the time had affinities for members of the same sex. And he quickly got married to make daddy happy.
Was he a dancer?
Yeah, he was with the Joffrey Ballet.
Okay.
He was with the Joffrey
so
Ballet, but he had
this. Yeah, that makes what Reagan did 80 times more despicable to me in my head. It's like how Tommy Lasorda handled his son having an affair with a player named Billy Bean, not the Billy Bean that's the general manager and what have you. Same namesake, different spelling. But he trades the player and disowns his kid for being gay.
Well, there's a lot. Well, it's worse because I know some elected officials, some that are still living, who voted against every gay bill and traveled, because I was in the entertainment business. Half of my staff, almost every place I worked, if not more, was gay, and traveled in circles with people that, my friends and worked with me, and was secretly, they were in the closet, but traveled in gay circles. And these politicians would vote against every bill because they didn't want to be outed by voting for it. Sad world. Some of them were United States senators.
Really? Well,
yeah, it went that high up in the government.
Can you blame society or can you blame the individuals for not changing the way society is? You know what I'm saying?
I think it's more society than the individuals. It is very, very difficult, or it was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s to come out. I mean, you lost your family. You lost your friends.
Right.
You maybe sometimes lost your job. If you weren't a singer, a dancer, or an actor, or a painter, you probably lost your job. Very difficult for people to stand on a principle that could destroy their life. I traveled in a profession where it just wasn't an issue. If you came to work and played your part, or built your set, or designed your costumes, you had a job, you had friends, but it was very difficult outside of your internal circle. I lost probably half of the people I was close to in the late 70s to the late 80s, including a cousin. And so, right and left. I did a show, Can with Leslie Caron. I produced it for tour. We closed in Toronto. It never did get to New York. But almost all the men from that cast have died. This was 1978. I produced the show in 78. And I'm sure that could be said about almost any cast back then. And all the great choreographers, they may have had a cause of death listed as something different than Variety. But those of us in the industry knew, cancer, pneumonia, whatever. But everybody knew, and even their families didn't want to put it in their obituaries. Maybe if it had been put in more obituaries, things would have changed sooner. But I can't say I'm happy to say it because I'm sad. I'm sad of all the people we lost, the great talent that we lost. And I think of all the songs that were never written or sung, and the dances that were never danced, and the poems that were never recited because people died too soon.
But I'm happy to say it's changed. The grandkids that were never seen. Brothers and sisters that lived without. And that spreads, that negativity spreads, that morose feeling of when death brings.
Now, a couple of decades later, we got a guy running for president.
Yes.
We got a guy running for president, very much out of the closet. Married. And it doesn't seem to be an issue in most of the country.
Well,
but he probably can't get elected in Alabama.
No, and it's an underlying issue in every state of the union till this day. People don't come out and say it anymore, but sometimes overt is better than covert. So you choose your poison, so to speak.
In some states it's not a problem. When I lived in Wisconsin and built a new performing arts center and a convention center there, I had not a good friendship, but a passing friendship with Tammy Baldwin. And Tammy Baldwin was a congressperson then. She ran for Senate, and she's definitely very much out of the closet. And she's a United States Senator from Madison, Wisconsin, and has always been out of the closet since she graduated law school. And now she's probably in her 60s. But in Madison, Wisconsin, you could do that. I was astounded that she was able to get elected to the Senate in a statewide election. But she's been a good senator.
Yeah. And speaking of the gay candidate, Mayor Pete, he's doing quite well in Iowa, according to the polls. So that's not a state I would have expected him to excel in.
No,
maybe
I know your politics. Your politics are far left of mine. I can tell by the way you list yourself on Facebook as your politics. I'm left of you are whatever you are. I think you said, but it shows the state of the Democratic Party that he's winning in Iowa. People are not happy with the regular choices, and maybe that's a good thing.
I agree with you. A moderate Democrat is no more than a Republican in today's day and age.
Yeah.
The center has gone way to the right. And I don't think Bernie's ideas are so extremely radical. He's no more than a 1939 FDR guy.
Not too many of those guys still around.
I know. Let's be happy that we are both still around to remember what in 1930, even if we weren't around in 1939,
I hatched in 44.
And me in 46. And
can you do me a favor? I want to ask you before we get off the air. Would you send me a text or some message of how I can listen to this? See what foolish things I may have said?
I will publish it later on today and send you a link to it. How about that?
I appreciate that.
You said nothing foolish, young man.
Okay. And anytime you want to do this, I'm happy to. There might even be more to talk about from summer camp. You remember Henry?
Do I remember Henry? Uncle Henry was the owner of the camp, and you talk about a character. You remember Arnold Fink?
Abraham Fink, Fink. Yeah, Uncle Henry owned most of the camp, but he had a couple of partners, and one of them had a granddaughter who went to the camp, Hope Weisfeld. And Hope, when we were 12, wore my sweater. That meant you were going steady. It also meant I didn't have a sweater the whole summer.
It's really incredible. I just reacquainted with Hope Weisfeld on Facebook, and you're a couple of years older. She was one of those in my age group. We went to the same socials all those years. Mm-hmm. And what a tremendous coincidence that her name is in your head as well as mine.
Would you send me a way I can get in touch with her when you send me something?
Of course.
I have obviously not spoken to her since I was 17 or 18, but I'd like to wish her well.
Beautiful.
But she lived in Willow Grove, if I remember, and her dad was a minority, a very small owner of the camp. They were somehow related.
I didn't know that. I knew the Kaufmans owned a piece of the camp.
Yes. And there were about 5 or 6 people.
Do you remember a name Schifris?
Nope.
Schifris.
Not off the top of my head.
They owned a piece of the camp when I was a kid on Pioneer Row. They came out to recruit me for the camp, recruit my parents and what have you. Wow. You come back on a regular basis. You're a pleasure to talk to. I really appreciate it, Bob.
Yeah. Send me a link and send me how I get in touch with Hope.
I will do that, and that will complete both of our days because I will publish this within the hour and send you that link.
Have a great day. Talk to you again, Ralph.
You too.
Or Zig, whichever the case may be. Bye.
Bob or Robert, whatever the case may be. How about that?
What's that?
All right. I say Bob or Robert, whatever the case may be as well.
Whatever, it depends on when you knew me.
Like I said, I knew you as Bobby, so I don't want to get.
Well, I think there were 5 Roberts in the bunk, and so everybody was either Bob, Bobby, Rob, Robbie, or Robert.
You were with the Burks, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I was a little younger. I was with Steve Hankin, Charlie Raitt, Nelson Davidowitz. Charles Raitt, I will send you his Facebook thing. I saw Charles about 7 or 8 years. He invited me up to his home in Santa Rosa, and I got to meet him and his family. Tremendously successful guy. Did something with the nurses. He became a nurse and had He was a nurse, and then he started a professional association / website, I think.
That's exactly what it was. He had a publication.
I spoke to him about 10 years ago. Kenny Wind was part of our age group.
Kenny, and he had a brother, and
Donnie.
The Winds, Donnie, and the Winds were cousins of the Saxes.
I didn't remember that. Kenny and I shared a birthday.
Really? Probably still do.
Yeah, we still do. Last time I spoke to Kenny, he was doing well. He was retiring. He was a workers' comp lawyer. He wrote the New Jersey workers' comp law.
Oh, really? I must say that this reminds me vividly how there was one person and one person alone who wasn't successful coming out of Kittatinny camp in life, and that was yours truly. But I'm friendly with the ones that were, and
you're successful in staying alive all these years.
Tell me about it.
Surviving the 60s was tough.
Surviving yesterday was tougher.
Yeah. Now, Donnie Wind, he died a while back.
I heard that. But
I have better friends from that camp than I do from high school or college. I remember more people from the camp and communicate. Well, I read the website. I don't really communicate. Once in a while I talk to somebody on the phone, but it's been a while.
Are you on the Kittatinny site on Facebook?
Yeah.
Oh.
And that's where I found you. Some number of years
ago. And that's
ago.
where I found you.
Yeah. Okay.
Talk soon, Bobby. Come back again.
Okay.
It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho, the weak link of it all. Thank you for listening. This has been one of the most fun days I've had in a long time. Thank you, Bob D'Angelo, Brooklyn,
Be well,
New York.
my friend.
Be you too. Shalom and all that stuff. Adios.
I'm done. I had to come and get the phone. What do you got? Because I didn't want to hold a cell phone to my ear for 45 minutes.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
We've been talking for an hour, damn more.
45 minutes, yeah.
So what'd you say?
He asked me questions. He started back talking about it.
We're going back on the hook.
I had to call in on this phone.
Because I had it off. I thought over by me.
I did. I came and got it quietly.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.